and we have Emma here as the timekeeper. The adjudicator, Mr. David Wilkins. The topic of this debate is that the burka/niqab should be banned in Australia. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Christian Brothers College. The negative team seated to my left is St. Peter's Girls' School. The speaking time for this debate is 8 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call the first affirmative speaker, Jack Catherwood.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jack Catherwood and I am the first speaker for the affirmative team. The topic for tonight's debate is that the burqa and niqab should be banned in Australia. We as the affirmative team define the burqa as a garment generally worn by women of Middle Eastern descent that covers the whole body with a mesh guard over the eyes so that they may see. The niqab is a similar garment that covers the entire body except for a small slit near the eyes, also for vision. This definition does not include the hijab or chador. The burqa is a cultural garment, but in no way is it religious. It is not mentioned anywhere in any sort of holy text. Many people do associate it with Islamic culture and define it as a religious garment. However, this is incorrect, as nowhere is it stated that women must wear it for any sort of religious reason. Dr. Ramil Islam, lecturer in Middle East politics of the Australian National University, has stated that the Quran does not explicitly say that you have to cover yourself in this manner. It only says that both men and women must dress moderately. We define banning the burqa as outlawing this garment from being worn in public places within our Australian society. This is a topic that needs to be discussed due to the increasing tensions between Middle Eastern Australians and the Australian culture. And we, the affirmative team, believe that the burqa and niqab should be banned. This evening, as the first speaker, I'll be talking to you about the fact that wearing the burqa is a form of oppression, as well as the security risks that it poses to Australian citizens. Our second speaker, Austin, will be talking about the removal of the burqa in the interest of social cohesion and the scapegoating of the Middle East. And our third speaker, Daniel, will sum up our team's case and rebut. Now, on to my arguments. Firstly, the very idea of the burqa is insulting, oppressive, and tyrannical. It is based off the idea that women need to hide themselves, their bodies, and their identities. And even more insultingly, they must do this all for the sake of men. Not only is this cultural practice an absolutely disgusting idea, it is not relevant within Australian life in any way. I'll now quote one of Australia's most influential Middle Eastern Australians, Sheikh Taj al-Din, who stated that, "If you take out uncovered meat and place it outside, without cover, and the cats come to eat it, whose fault is it, the cats or the uncovered meat? The uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her burqa, no problem would have occurred." Now let that sink in for a minute. Women, you need to wear the burqa because men can't be trusted not to be distracted by the mere sight of a woman's skin. This objectification and sexualization of women is a very strong message, and frankly, its deranged and barbaric ideology is something that has no place in Australia. It is a backwards and medieval way of thinking that should not be a part of our society in any way. Based on this information, to promote the burqa is to denounce women to little more than objects, who should be hidden away with no voice and no opinions. As a proud nation of equal opportunity, it would only be a detriment to continue to allow this systematic oppression of women to continue within our country. Even when faced with these facts, many still think that there is no law about wearing a burqa, and so it is the women's choice. But we as the affirmative team challenge this. This idea ignores context, circumstance, and is an unwitting statement. It is the equivalent of saying that cyberbullying isn't real because you can turn your phone off. Within Middle Eastern Australian communities, there is a social pressure and expectation that women will wear the burqa. The perceived choice is not a reality, as women who have tried to execute this choice have faced outcast, violence, and shame. A police report from Sydney showed that over 100 women reported that by not wearing the burqa, they made themselves feel unsafe in their own homes. This statistic was associated with 132 cases of Middle Eastern women in Australia experiencing domestic violence in the last 6 months. And this was in fact within just Sydney, not the rest of the country. These statistics go hand in hand with Australia's shameful and embarrassing cases of domestic violence. And frankly, it's something that needs to stop and can't be promoted within our society. Now, on to my second argument. The burqa and niqab as a garment, excluding any sort of cultural or social context, is dangerous. The very idea that such a piece of clothing could be allowed while police officers are enforced to remove their helmets when inside premises is ludicrous. The burqa is risky in many different ways. The first is that it allows anonymity. Literally anyone could be under a burqa and you would never be able to tell, as demonstrated recently by a particular federal politician. This is then coupled with the fact that it allows for the concealing of almost anything. Being such a massive garment, it would be extremely easy to conceal any sort of weapon or illicit item. This poses a risk to all, as literally anyone could easily be carrying a weapon at any time. There have been multiple cases in Europe in which women and men have been found to be concealing weapons under a burqa. One such case is in Denmark, when 5 men were found to be concealing bombs while wearing their mother's burqas. Upon their capture, they were interrogated and admitted to plans to bomb a public area. Imagine if these people hadn't been caught. Their plans could have killed numerous people, a risk that Australia just doesn't have the luxury of taking, especially considering that Australia's National Terrorism Threat Advisory System has been dancing between certain and probable for there being a terrorist attack for the last 18 months. In our own city of Adelaide, 3 terrorism plans have been thwarted by national security in the last 2 years. But it only takes one successful attack to completely break down the whole city and even the whole nation. While banning the burqa won't take away this very serious issue, it will reduce how easily it is to carry out any sort of unlawful activity within our country. And so, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we as the affirmative team strongly believe that the burqa and niqab should be banned, as the garment is oppressive of women and a safety risk to all of Australia's citizens. It is in the best interest of both the general public and particularly the women who wear them that the burqa and niqab are banned from Australia. Thank you.
Call upon the first negative speaker, Brooke Oliver.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the burqa and niqab should be banned in Australia. We agree with the definition given by the affirmative team. However, we as a negative team disagree with this statement. As first speaker, I will be discussing the religious and social aspects of this debate, demonstrating why introducing a ban is an absurd idea. Our second speaker, Lucy, will be discussing why politically the ban is the worst possible option for Australia, and our third speaker, Sophie, will rebut and sum up our team case. However, before I begin my points, I would like to point out a few flaws in the affirmative team's argument. To begin with, the first speaker tried to persuade you that the burqa is not mentioned in the Quran. This is simply incorrect, as it is mentioned 5 times and open to religious interpretation, like all texts. He also tried to convince you that veils objectify women. However, as I will discuss in my debate later tonight, these women choose to wear the veil as their religious and social choice to fulfill their own conscience and desires. As I will further elaborate in my points tonight, domestic violence has no connotation to the burqa and niqab wearing. As well as this, he mentioned the security factors. Banning a veil women have the right and freedom to choose will simply not diminish any terrorism or security breaches. My first point is how singling out the burqa and niqab in a motion to ban them directly stigmatises Muslim women and only Muslim women alone. Singling these women out is quite simply a sombre capitulation to the Islamophobia running rampant in our society, as our second speaker Lucy will elaborate on. The Australian government has not proposed legislation to call for bans on the orthodox Jewish practice of recently married women shaving their heads, or wearing a habit, the wearing of a holy cross, or even a turban. Banning the burqa and niqab alone plays to the stereotype that Muslims should be singled out in society and segregated in formal legislation. Banning a burqa strikes at the very heart of these women and their identities, raising the question of the type of society Australia is and is attempting to become. Banning the wearing of these two garments in Australia, a secular country, one where religion does remain one voice among many and one option among other Australians, is entirely arbitrary, unjust and equally offensive as the Taliban's laws demanding that women do cover up. In banning the burqa, Australia is sending a message to the world that our standards of human rights, of freedom of religion and expression are only applicable to certain types of people. Many Muslim women wear the burqa or niqab to do so out of their own free will. This is an empirical fact. It has been highlighted elsewhere that Muslim women wear these for a variety of political reasons, including as a response to the westernisation of society and for freedom from male harassment. By banning the burqa, the majority population is effectively preventing Muslim women from exercising their human right to do what they want with their very own bodies and express themselves in the way they see fit. Legalising against and criminalising these veils is not going to achieve equality in Western societies in any way, shape or form. Rather, banning the burqa is going to bully Muslim women into abandoning their cultural traditions, religious choices and political expressions. It is not even a question whether or not the wearing of the face veil is part of the orthodoxy of Islam. It is a question of why anyone would attempt to take this choice away from this minority group of women, thus stigmatising them. Banning the burqa and niqab is an assault on the most basic human rights of women having control over their own bodies and minds, as my second speaker will elaborate on. The burqa and niqab are simply not the problem, but a symptom of a larger problem of women feeling pressured to conform to the objectification of women's bodies in Western countries. Elaborating on my point of the free choice nature of wearing the burqa and niqab leads me to my second point, the choice and independence the burqa and niqab bring to the wearers. Women who wear the niqab and burqa have fervently rejected any suggestion that they are forced to wear either veil or that it is repressive. The woman at the European Court of Human Rights case strongly rejected any suggestion that she was forced to wear the Islamic face veil, arguing that, according to a well-established feminist position, the veil denoted women's self-assertion and participation in society, and that it was not a question of pleasing men, but of satisfying her own conscience. A proposed ban would force these women to make an unenviable choice: obey the law and deny their faiths and beliefs, or obey their faith and risk criminal charges, or, alternatively, stay at home and become isolated from the community and Australian society. In interviews conducted with wearers of the Islamic face veil in both France and England, there was no evidence found of any domineering parents forcing their daughters to wear the face veil, and the large majority had not been coerced by their husbands to wear it. Some women even stated that they chose to begin and continue wearing the veil despite the objections of their parents. And one interviewee reported that she delayed beginning to wear the face veil until her husband supported her decision, making it one of mutual respect and agreeance. Even for the small minority of women who believe that the face veil is oppressive in Australia, who, in the instance of worldwide human right fulfilment, should be the priority, creating a ban is unlikely to have anything close to the desired effect. Banning the face veil would not result in oppressed women throwing off their veils and revelling in their newfound freedom. Instead, the more likely result is their exclusion from society, as their oppressors force them to remain home, making this measure counterproductive, but also giving the opportunity for any oppressors to apply further oppression on these women. Along with this, any idea of preventing domestic violence through this ban is ludicrous, as, whilst the ban is also being proposed in Britain, women's domestic violence services are simultaneously being slashed. This ban is not about protecting the rights of Muslim women in any form, rather as an attempt to breach them. So, for the reasons I've outlined tonight, we believe the burqa and niqab should not be banned in Australia. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Austin Lovell.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, members of the opposition. Before I commence my argument, I will begin by rebutting the opposition's first speaker. The first negative speaker has tried to tell you that wearing the burqa is solely a religious act at the beginning of her talk. But she later contradicted herself in saying that it's a cultural choice, and some Islamic and Middle Eastern people of that descent later decided, because of the support of their husbands and of their own will and not of their parents' accord. See, this further exemplifies the lack of education surrounding the burqa as a whole, where we don't understand whether it was religious or cultural. All other articles of religious clothing also do not conceal the face and cannot be compared in the same manner. You also stated that banning the burqa would send a negative message to the world, whereas other major countries such as Germany, Italy, and France have actually banned the burqa for the very same principles that we are discussing tonight. I will now begin with my first point. The issue of the burqa has stirred a hornet's nest of opinions. It isn't too surprising that the question of covering up or not raises various religious, cultural, and gender issues. Against the backdrop of varied opinions on Islam and Muslim people around the world, the debate on wearing the burqa represents the continuation, albeit upscaling, of the focus on Muslim women as the signifiers of Islam and Muslim identities. As Australia is influenced strongly by this debate, with 2.6% of Australians of direct Middle Eastern heritage, the government at state and federal levels has demonstrated cautious activism in dealing with this issue. In doing this, the government protects the rights of the Australian Middle Eastern minorities, reducing the space in which a heightened sense of exclusion could develop among them. But how can we protect a symbol which is misunderstood and inconspicuously connected with fear? Terror, danger, judgment, all immensely unnecessary facets of Australian culture. My first argument, social cohesion and undermining values. When a country is created, leaders establish laws and social conventions to which all the citizens must abide by. Irrespective of their gender, ethnicity, or age, laws are the foundation of cohesive interaction between a populace. As with all systems of government, not adhering to such rules yields consequences. Sharia law is the law of multiple Middle Eastern countries, which cannot be altered or varied. It is a strict set of rules and laws which must be abided by at all times, and is stated in the Quran. With a set of laws which, when criticised, can lead to your own death, as stated in the Quran, it must be said that Australia's laws promote equality and dignity. When Middle Eastern people migrate to Australia, with them comes the cultural normalities of their homelands. But how can we, as Australians, be expected to adapt our values and beliefs to foster such new inclusion? We welcome inclusion, but there must be a line. We are a nation of diversity, but we should not be obliged to integrate every new unique custom. We cannot have fluidity in social or cultural normalities when ambiguity as to what is expected leads to issues. The burqa undermines Australian culture, a culture of openness, of community and connectivity. When other developed Western nations, including France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and even Egypt drafted legislation in 2016 to ban the full-face veils, it must be said that even countries which have extensive Middle Eastern populations have understood the burqa's pitfalls. France, with a Middle Eastern population of 4.7 million people, approximately 11% in 2011, it is a prime example of how a nation with immense global power have dealt with this issue. According to the Australian Government's Department of Immigration and Border Protection, Australian society values include respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual, where to be an Australian citizen means to share a common identity, a common bond which unites all Australians while respecting their diversity. A diversity in identity which cannot be experienced if individuals are concealed behind the veil. It is simple. Eradicate the issue of the problem, effectively and considerately, much like a friend would be expected to abide by the rules and expectations of your household Foreign immigrants must be expected to do the same. It is a matter of global equality, not dismissal, to build social harmony, understanding and acceptance of all cultures. To rid these immigrants of the constrictive bounds of their homelands, it is a matter of national inclusion and openness. After all, we are all Australians. On to my second point, that the burqa has become a scapegoat of the Middle Eastern culture. Firstly, a scapegoat is defined as a person or object which is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others, especially for reasons of expediency. Perceived as a symbol of terror and concealment, bordering mystery, the burqa has become much more than an article of clothing. The debate of banning the burqa has been stretched. It is no longer a question of whether we are able to integrate cultural practices, but rather, can we remove a forever misunderstood symbol? The banning of the burqa will not be done due to the lack of education of its meaning, nor due to the fact that it is different. The burqa is about the control and subjugation of women, a control which transcends nations and gender stereotypes. A symbol which has terroristic connotations, it has become an unnecessary representation of Middle Eastern culture, which is obliged to a heightened degree of respect and understanding. The burqa is culturally blinding, leaving all who see it to only associate its presence with negative action. As time progresses, it has become increasingly discerning to hear of daily reports of Middle Eastern women being verbally abused, sworn at, physically attacked and spat on, simply because of their cultural recommendations. Middle Eastern Australians are not a homogenous group, as the media might lead us to believe, but they make up a small, culturally diverse section of Australian society. Despite this, the burqa masks the inherent goodness of a culturally rich majority. Where perception is skewed, scapegoating rises. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we have seen how the burqa is no longer a choice, but rather a psychologically forced facet of Middle Eastern life. An article of clothing which has the barrier between discrimination in the Middle East has now itself become the point of discernment in Australia. Why? Because the principles it stands for are morally and ethically inapplicable to Australian society. In addition, social cohesion is fundamental in the manifestation of a prosperous and peaceful political and social climate. However, this level of understanding and acceptance cannot be reached without the removal of this icon, an icon which is misleading, which scapegoats Middle Eastern culture and undermines social cohesion. It is left to exist in Australia, injustice will continue to rise. If it is removed, cohesion will thrive. Thank you.
I now call upon the second negative speaker, Lucy Cox.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, Timekeeper, audience and opposition. Tonight we are debating whether the burqa and niqab should be banned within Australia. We as the negative team believe the government should be unable to determine the manner in which people dress and practice their religion. I'll be explaining to you how this ban would break Section 116 of the Australian Constitution and Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the danger to international relations that the burqa and niqab ban may cause, and the social divide caused by political verification of beliefs derived from Islamophobia. I will begin, however, by rebutting some of the opposition's arguments. The first speaker said that the burqa led to oppression, and therefore the banning of the burqa would cease oppression within Islamic groups. He also, to confirm this, he used a stat regarding the violence in homes in Sydney. We would like to remind the opposition team that this ban would have no effect over whether the burqa was worn in homes, as it only affects the public areas, and therefore is irrelevant. He also said that banning the burqa would improve security. There are many alternatives to this. People of Islamic faith could continue to wear the burqa, and they could have security checks within airports and other public areas in which the burqa was of a security concern. These would include rooms with a woman who would be able to check, in which the woman wearing the hijab, the burqa, would be able to remove the burqa and, The second and first speaker continually use France as an example. This is ridiculous. There have been 10 terrorist attacks in France since 2010, and to use France as a successful example of the burqa ban and the decrease in terrorism is simply absurd. The second speaker also said that the banning of the burqa would result in social cohesion. This is incorrect, as proven in France in 2010, again, because there has been 10 terrorist attacks since 2014, showing it's ineffective at stopping terrorism, and it is also ineffective at creating social cohesion, as apparent in the current conversation regarding the banning of the burkini within France. Second speaker also said, the burqa promotes Sharia law due to the Middle Eastern origins of the wearers. The burqa is not in fact a representation of the law, but the religion. They also said that Australia should not be forced to adopt Sharia law or adopt aspects of Sharia law that they referred to as the burqa. Whereas in fact, removing the burqa or banning the burqa would be in violation to our own law, section 116 of the Australian Constitution, which supports religious freedom. On to my first point, that banning the burqa and niqab demotes religious freedoms and thus violates section 116 of the Australian Constitution and Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Section 116 states, the Commonwealth shall not make any law for establishing any religion or for imposing any religious observance or for prohibiting the free exercise of any religion, and no religious test shall be required as a qualification for any office or in any public trust under the Commonwealth. The burqa and niqab are an undeniable aspect of Islamic religion and are items used by Islamic peoples to gain closer connection to their God by applying to the Quran, the Islamic religious text, by covering and being modest. The banning of the burqa or niqab would also be in violation of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the breaching of which could negatively impact Australia's relationship with the United Nations and other member states of the United Nations, further impacting possible future international decisions, impacting poorly on Australia's future. Article 18 states, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his or her religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or in private, to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. The proposed ban of the burqa and niqab would ensure Australian women with Islamic beliefs who choose to wear the niqab and burqa become unable to manifest their religion in public, therefore inhibiting the rights of Muslim Australian women, breaching the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and jeopardising Australia's relationship with other member states. Denying Australian Muslims the right to practice their religion and abide by their religious text is denying them the fundamental rights the remainder of Australians are protected by, providing a means of separation between Australian Muslims and the remainder of the Australian public, further demonising them by indicating that Australian Muslims are not worthy of the basic rights granted to all Australian citizens, therefore inducing a religious hierarchy that is not welcome in a secular nation derived from constitutional law. To my second point, banning the burqa and niqab would further threaten international relations with predominantly Islamic countries by disregarding their culture and beliefs, by not providing Islamic peoples within Australia the same rights and respect non-Islamic people within Arab countries. Whilst within Arab countries it is not enforced, all women wear an abaya, a black robe that does not cover the face, they do not restrict people of alternate faiths such as Christianity or atheism from practicing or not practicing their religion in public. This includes a lack of restriction for the wearing of religious affiliation from these religions. For example, if you are of Christian faith in the United Arab Emirates, you would still be allowed to wear a crucifix, and thus practice your religion in a public manner. By proposing the burqa and niqab ban, Australia is forcefully stopping 640,675 people of Muslim faith within Australia from practicing in the way they prefer, thus not affording Islamic Australians the same freedoms as Australians of alternate religions receive in Arab countries. This lack of equality could increase tensions between Australian and Arab nations, as banning the burqa and the niqab may be interpreted as the rejection and blatant disregard for the culture of the vast majority of their people. Now to my third point. A politically decisive action, such as the banning of the burqa and the niqab, could increase social tension by verifying actions derived from Islamophobia. Social tensions between Islamic and non-Islamic peoples are pre-existing within Australia, as expressed by the figure that 79.6% of Muslim women receive abuse derived from Islamophobia within Australian society when wearing head coverings such as the burqa or niqab. This expresses the link between visual representation of Islam and public hatred. Furthermore, abuse of this kind within Australia has statistically spiked when Australian media has discussed Islam in a negative manner, provoked often by the popularisation of political concerns regarding Islam, such as the 2014 discussion about banning the wearing of burqas in Australian public. This shows the alarming connection between Australian politics and a religious-based social divide within the Australian public. In 2010, France was in a similar situation, struggling with the fear of terrorism and resorting to Islamophobia, resulting in the ban of wearing a burqa and niqab in public, which has not only been proven to not decrease the terrorism rate, the basis of Islamophobia, as France has been victim to 10 terrorist attacks since 2014, but has been ineffective in reducing Islamophobia within France, which may be the cause of yet another ban of Islamic-specific clothing, the burkini, proving to Australia that removing the perceived symbol of terror does not remove terror.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Daniel Malcolm.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start off by saying, or by referring to how the opposition has connected the burqa to Islam in such a strong fashion. When we outlined our argument from the start as in no way is it connected to Islam beyond the connotation we as a society give it to Islam, the connection we incidentally make, and hence the whole scapegoating phenomenon we talked about earlier. I'd like to start off by rebutting the first speaker when she said that she agrees with our definition, but one of the fundamental parts of our definition was the fact that we are not associating it to Islam. It's a Middle Eastern cultural garment, not in any way a religious garment. She said that they choose to wear the burqa, however the choice has been imposed on them, indoctrinated into them from a very young age due to cultural pressures that follow Middle Eastern culture. And unfortunately, or fortunately, in Australia, the cultures of other nations, while they should be respected, should be, if harmful, challenged, because we live in an equal, equitable society where such cultural practices should be questioned at least. She said it directly segregates women. Well, the reason it directly segregates women is because of this negative connotation the Australian population is actually attaching to the burqa, and then hence the negative impacts that the Australian population is delivering on these people. And then, while it's perhaps not fair, the best way we can deal with it is by removing the issue at face, which is to ban the burqa. The facial coverings are a symbol of negative facets of both Islam, incidentally, and Middle Eastern culture, and that's just something that is really unfortunate and that we have to deal with in the most simplest, quickest way possible. She said the Taliban's laws require women are covered up. So how then is this a voluntary cover-up of women? How is it women's choice to cover up when it is actually a law within their culture to be covered completely? She said women wear it to oppose westernisation and escape harassment. Well, in regards to to opposing westernisation, that is using the burqa as a political tool, the very thing that they proclaim they're not using it for. They're saying it's, or the opposition is saying that the burqa is a way for women to practice getting closer with their God, but the first speaker has just said that they wear it often to oppose westernisation. And if they're living in Australia, our Australian society, how can we accept that they're opposing westernisation when they're living here, when they're residing here? And she also said to escape harassment. Well, how are they escaping harassment when so many women are verbally abused, physically assaulted because of their covering up with this burqa that people attach so much fear to? She also said they reject the notion they are forced to wear it. But then again, that comes back to the whole topic of indoctrination and cultural indoctrination. Do they really have this choice when they could be entirely shunned by their culture for choosing what they think represents equality? She also said that if we were to ban it, they could potentially stay at home and just become further isolated by society out of a lack of conscience, potentially. But how would they become isolated or further isolated from society more than they already are when society is so pressurously like segregating them in the first place because of this fear, again, the scapegoating that's been attached to the burqa? And then finally she said the exclusion from society because oppressors would make them stay at home, so they would be excluded from their culture because their oppressors would make them stay at home, because again, they're defying their culture because it's their choice at the end of the day. And she said that the oppressors would make them stay at home. So how is this then a free choice? If they do in fact have oppressors, which is exactly what we've been saying, that it is a symbol of oppression. The second speaker has tried to tell you that the government should not ban the way people practice their religion. And again, this comes back to, is the burqa a religious garment? And the fact is it's not, it's a cultural garment purely that the Australian population, out of perhaps ignorance, has associated with Islam. Because again, it isn't mentioned overly at all prevalently in the Quran. It simply suggests moderate cover-up, which can be achieved by the hijab. And many women do wear the hijab, and they are exposed to much less segregation and abuse by the Australian public. And not just in Australia as well, in other nations as well, as we can see. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. She's tried to tell you that it wouldn't affect domestic violence as we're not banning it in the homes. Well, the fact is, the violence comes from these women rejecting the veil in the first place. So if we were to outright ban it, what could the partners do? What could these men do? Could they continue to abuse their wives for doing something illegal? And we've actually said they can continue to wear it in their homes, because that's none of the public spectacle's business at all. So why then should it not affect domestic violence? And she said there have been 10 terrorist attacks in France since 2010, or she changed it to 2014, but well, the burqa was only proposed to be banned in 2016, so we have yet to see this change, because it's too early to precisely see the real difference. So using older statistics really doesn't substantiate the point. She's tried to tell you that the burqa isn't a representation of Sharia law, but is a representation of Islam. But then it's heavily associated again to Middle Eastern culture, which practices Sharia law, or Shahira law. And while Islam is a huge part of that, the burqa itself is attached to the cultural element, not the religious element. And in relation to the point she made about the Constitution, well, in fact, the Constitution has no agency here. It is not related to religious freedoms or the limiting of religious freedoms. It's related to the cultural freedoms and the cultural dangers that it imposes. So in summary, our first speaker, Jack, has told you that the burqa is the symbol of oppression, that women really don't have this choice because they're brought up with this huge cultural bias that they need to be veiled for the sake of their protection. But then again, you know, the Muslim leader we've quoted said the reason that they're veiled is because men can't control themselves. Well, how then is that not oppression? Full stop. You're placing the blame on the victim of this abuse. He's also said that the rhetoric behind it is de-individualising and dehumanising. And the fact is, it is. It's de-unifying the Australian population through both a fear, a mutual fear that it's inspiring of each other. So the Middle Eastern community is becoming afraid of the Australian population because they're retaliating, they're harassing. And finally, the Australian population is scared of the burqa because of the scapegoating reasons. And again, it's about this unification we need, this social cohesion that should be of the utmost importance to Australian culture. And so, while it may not be the best option, it really poses no benefit to our Australian culture, to our social cohesion, to our way of Australian liberty. So, on that note, I'll conclude. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Sophie Sherwood.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Chairperson, Timekeeper and fellow debaters, the topic for tonight's debate has been that the burqa/niqab should be banned in Australia. We St. Peter's girls have taken the negative side. Before I go into the themes of the opposition's debate, I'd like to point out something. We haven't suggested that the burqa isn't a connotation we've come up with. As we've previously stated, the burqa, the actual idea of covering yourself and the religious interpretation of the burqa is explicitly referred to 5 times in the Quran. Furthermore, the opposition have said, to address the fact that apparently this is not a religious debate, the opposition have suggested that by banning it, this will deal with the negative aspects of Islam within society. However, by suggesting this, they are suggesting that the burqa or niqab is actually directly associated to Islam. The opposition's argument tonight has come down to 3 main themes. Firstly, the idea of social cohesion and scapegoating. Secondly, the idea of oppression and how it oppresses Muslim women. And thirdly, the idea that the burqa is a security risk to Australia and that it is inherently dangerous. Now, I'd like to discuss the idea of social cohesion. The opposition have mentioned that there are lots of laws and social conventions within Australia and that these are important for cohesion, and we completely agree. However, they then went on to mention Sharia law, which Sharia law is not actually relevant to Islam itself. It is relevant to the Middle Eastern countries, and whether Muslims follow Sharia law within Australia or not is actually not going to affect the vast majority of Australians. However, furthermore, they brought up examples of other countries banning the burqa, which has supposedly resulted in an increase of social cohesion, for example, France. The reason we've used France as an example is because the ban on the burqa did occur in 2010, and this has actually shown over the 7 years what has happened as a result of this. President Francois Hollande was actually quoted saying that he has noticed after the ban of the burqa that there has been a decrease in social cohesion and an increase of Islamophobia and fear. As we've also mentioned, there have been 10 terrorist attacks in France since 2010. This basically denies the fact that apparently banning the burqa would help to increase security. However, this simply isn't the case. Other countries have also demonstrated this is not the case, such as Germany, in which the incidence of terrorist attacks in Germany has been demonstrated to have been risen by 10%, as Angela Merkel recently stated in 2016. They've also stated that the burqa is a scapegoat for other things from the Middle East, and that the burqa is that there is a lack of education around the burqa. However, the banning of the burqa is based on, we agree that the banning of the burqa is based on miseducation. However, the miseducation is the connotation with fear and terrorism that the burqa has within Australian society. This is, by suggesting that we should ban the, it is not fair to suggest that Muslims should ban the burqa when the problem is not inherent within the burqa itself. It is inherent within the problem within Australian society and the way it is associated. It is putting Muslims to blame for the connotations and associations that have been made with it when it is not their fault. Sarah Hanson-Young and
Brandis have both acknowledged that by banning the burqa, social cohesion within Australia will drop dramatically, as it will further associate the fear already present with fear and terrorism, which has recently been elevated due to Pauline Hanson's stunts within the Senate. The second theme focused on the idea that the burqa is based on oppression and tyranny. The opposition has said that the idea of the burqa is to oppress women and is something that has been set out by men. Now, whilst this may have been true in the 13th century, this certainly isn't true now. The vast majority of Muslim women these days have the choice as to whether they wear the burqa or not and how they choose to religiously interpret the Quran. The large majority of Muslim women, as mentioned by our first speaker, Brooke, currently choose to wear the burqa/niqab as a form of empowerment and ownership of their body. By banning the burqa, the opposition is actually suggesting that women will no longer have the choice in modern-day society as to whether they want to wear this garment or not. It is effectively telling them that they cannot wear it even if they choose to. And they've also suggested that by being forced to wear the burqa is because Islam is an indoctrinating religion, or Middle Eastern culture is indoctrinating, and it has been indoctrinated into this. However, this is making unfair assumptions into the religion and culture, and we don't believe this is relevant to the debate. Furthermore, by introducing a ban on the burqa, we are, as I've previously stated, we are actually removing a woman's right to choose how she chooses to express her faith or her interpretation of the Quran. The opposition has also stated a Muslim leader who is a man. However, although this is we believe it would have been better to quote some of the more relevant Muslim women in Australian society, such as Amani Ali, who was recently on ABC News discussing the hijab, the burqa and the niqab in Australian society. As recently quoted by George Brandis as well, in relation to the aspect of women being apparently oppressed by the burqa, he quoted that women can choose to obey the law and deny their faith, express their faith and face persecution, or stay at home and become isolated. We are not suggesting as well that that by wearing the burqa, women are going to be opposing westernization. We are suggesting that we can live in a cohesive and diverse society where both cultures are free to express themselves and express their religion. Now to the third theme, that the burqa and the niqab is inherently dangerous. They've suggested that the burqa is dangerous because of anonymity. However, this argument is mostly false due to the fact that it is based on several key points and assumptions. One, that the burqa itself is inherently dangerous. The idea of banning the burqa because of security risks has its foundations on the fact that Islam is deemed to be a violent religion by many. This is based on the extreme media coverage of many terrorist attacks by ISIS or ISIL in recent society. There is a huge amount of Islamophobia and fear with banning the burqa, and banning the burqa, with the burqa, and banning the burqa is only going to reinforce and emphasize this fear within society and the association that it has with terrorism. The opposition has also brought up Denmark as an example of where banning the burqa has been successful, and discussed people who could have been killed due to carrying guns under their burqas. However, we would like to point out that this is an appeal to the emotions. It is also important to note that in a study conducted by the Federal Police, only one attempted crime within the past 30 years was actually attempted when someone was wearing a burqa. This is an extremely low statistic, which really doesn't provide much evidence for the fact that the burqa should be banned because of security risks. Now I will quickly sum up our team's case, convincing you that the burqa or niqab should not be banned within Australia. Our first speaker, Brooke, spoke about the social and religious aspects of this debate. Firstly, about how it is not an oppressive choice for women, and how banning the burqa will not achieve the desired effect by the government. Our second speaker, Lucy, spoke about the political side of this debate, how it violates Section 116 of the Australian Constitution and Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She also discussed how it damages international relations. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, it is clear why the burqa and niqab should not be banned in Australia. Thank you.